want to watch this.
An episode-by-episode look at the late 70s television classic and its less than classic follow-up from 1980.
Oh, frack.
One is great and is held up remarkably well, while the other is chained up to the radiator in the basement whenever guests come over.
I feel you.
Battlestar Galactica.
See that the humans remain entertained until the end.
In Part 1, we looked at the 1978 series of Battlestar Galactica. In Part 2, we looked at its sequel series Galactica 1980. And so, as threatened, in our final video looking at the original generation of Galactica, we're going to look at each of the 34 or so episodes of Galactica broadcast between 1978 and 1980.
No, you're right. We don't have anything to lose.
Battlestar Galactica was originally envisaged as a few television movies with a weekly series following at some point in the future. But the series part was rushed into production. However, the pilot episode, known as Saga of a Star World, is a pretty pure expression of what Galactica was meant to be. Impressive and epic. It was of course later split into 3 episodes, with a slightly cut down version released theatrically as Battlestar Galactica.
Looking back is contagious.
The 12 colonies of man, each named after a different sign of the zodiac, are about to end 1,000 years of hostility with the Cylons.
That's lucky, isn't it, Starbuck? Yeah, that's a real stroke of luck.
Commander Adama isn't so sure of the Cylons' desire for peace. As we start, we'll meet a few characters. Adama's oldest son, Apollo, is supposed to go on a patrol with his best mate, Starbuck, who feigns illness so that Apollo's younger brother, Zach, can go on his first mission. Just so long as he stops singing Jesse's Girl over the radio. The Cylons, too, are not big fans of Jesse's Girl. The armistice has been used as a ploy by the Cylons, helped by the human agent Baltar to launch an attack against the fleet and the colonies. The fleet is almost destroyed with only the Battlestar Galactica remaining. Commander Adama tells the survivors of the colonies to find whatever ships they can find and join the Galactica on a search for a long-lost 13th colony. I'll give you 3 guesses as to the name of this colony.
Mars?
I'll give you a clue. It has an E in it.
Florida?
Yeah, sure. Why not? Go Dolphins.
We're very short on fighter pilots.
I'm too little to be a pilot.
After a literal game of Minesweeper, the fleet finds Cylon, a planet rich in the fuel source Tylium, which also seems to have a resort and a casino where the odds favor the players.
They've got everything we need here, plenty of it. You're happy to share.
Adama is also engaged in a power struggle with Sire Yuri, a powerful politician who wants to prematurely declare the emergency over and settle on the planet Cylon, despite the fact that the locals, the Ovians, are in league with the Cylons and they just want to use the humans as a food source. Look, nobody's perfect. A little bit of subterfuge sees the pilots ready for the eventual Cylon attack, and the Cylon base star is destroyed along with the dangerously combustible planet Cylon, and of course all of the Ovians and apparently any of the people who are left behind. Then of course the business of Battlestar and Galacticating can begin.
You do so with my utter contempt.
This pilot or intro movie or the first 3 episodes or the slightly cut down theatrical release, however you experience it, is really, really very good. Not just for 1978, but it still holds up incredibly well. Battlestar Galactica's intro movie, even with the hint of cheese, does end up being the least cheesiest and most successful of all of the space operas released in the wake of Star Wars' success. It's not subsumed by terrible effects, poor plots and perfunctory acting. It did have a little bit of cheese and perfunctory acting, but it was by far the closest that anybody came to replicating the feel of Star Wars for the small screen, until of course the Star Wars movies themselves hit the small screen. It's still an American television show from the late 70s, but this manages to set up a world that's developed in parallel to our own. Like America, Galactic has its own measurements that don't make sense. We have centons, microns, metrons, sectars, yarons. The world building in Galactica was the thing that saved it from being a simple clone of Star Wars, despite the lawsuits and the obvious design similarities.
I wonder what this looks like in the daytime.
This is the daytime.
There are things that fall a little flat, some clunkiness and exposition, but as an introduction to Galactica, it does a pretty good job of getting the fleet moving.
What's worrying you more, the mission? Or you're being made to look foolish by Yuri?
Jane Seymour was already a big star and was not envisaged to appear much beyond the first movie. In fact, her character Serena was meant to be dying of a terminal illness. In some drafts, she also wasn't Boxy's mother. Apollo was still named Skylar until a few days into production. Dirk Benedict was cast after filming had begun. And here, Starbuck's voluminous hair could be used to load a cannon.
Muffy!
Even Noah Hathaway as young Boxy tends not to be super annoying. just annoying enough thanks to his lines often consisting of
Muffet, come back here!
John Colicos' Baltar, just Baltar, is a human traitor working with the Cylons. He helps the Cylons with the view that his colony would be spared, except
you have missed the entire point of the war.
In the theatrical release, the Cylons are about to execute Baltar. In the TV version, a new Cylon leader intends to use Baltar to make peace with the humans. Maren Jensen as Adama's daughter Athena would find her role quickly whittled down in favour of Laurette Spang as Cassiopeia, who's an escort that would quickly be turned into a nurse for the series. Cassiopeia was originally meant to be a one-off character, but in this scene, it does look like Apollo shoots her. Starbuck's liaison with Cassiopeia would prove slightly controversial with the network's Standards and Practices department, where the pair are making out in a launch tube. Starbuck has taken off his shirt, and a jealous Athena turns on a steam vent. The scene was reshot with Starbuck having his shirt on, but it's never really explained what happens to Cassiopeia, but either way it didn't seem to wreck her hair. It was a very expensive pilot for the era, something like $13 million, which of course does involve a lot of the startup costs of building a world from scratch, including sets and costumes, and of course, the specialist of special effects.
I guess we see things differently.
There were problems during production. The director, Richard Kohler, disagreed with Larson, who hadn't liked how the pilot had been shot, and Kohler was replaced by Alan J. Levy halfway through shooting. Kohler ended up with the sole credit, but Levy would collect something like a third of the residuals and would go on to work on more episodes of the series. Alan J. Levy would of course be one of the most prolific television directors of the era, where he worked on almost every primetime American series from the 70s and 80s, or at least the ones that we cover on this channel. The effects team had their own beef on the production, who, as we mentioned in the first part of this review, left a cheeky message hidden in the lights of Caprica. But even with the fantastic effects from John Dykstra and an ex-ILM team, effects footage was already being recycled by the end of the pilot. The fantastic effects in this pilot would soon appear again and again and again. Speaking of recycling, on the planet Carolon, there's one scene in an elevator. I call it the seams scene.
Something seems to be wrong.
And then for some reason, the scene is refilmed almost word for word with different characters.
Something seems to be wrong.
Even when the episode was cut down for theatrical release, they included both versions of this scene. The initial movie event on network television in 1978 ran 3 hours with commercials. The actual program ran for 2 hours and 20 minutes and change, and was later turned into 3 episodes for syndication. And of course, there's also a 2-hour cut released theatrically in other countries before the series was broadcast, and then was also released in the US. The 2-hour cut loses a few nice scenes of Adama and his family, or Starbuck and Athena having a moment, but is otherwise a good way to experience the pilot.
Seems to be taking us all the way to the bottom.
Something seems to be happening.
So long as you really enjoy that scene in the elevator.
I wonder what's down here.
I wonder what's down there.
The theatrical release was also one of the last movies to use Universal's Sense-Around system, which was an early form of subwoofer. It was only used on 4 films, and on Galactica, every time we had an establishing shot of the hero ship, the theatre rocked so much that all of the dried chewing gum under the seats came loose. The Ovions were one of the few alien species shown in the series, perhaps to avoid comparisons with Star Wars, but there are a lot of reasonably cool and effective designs. Less effective or more effective depending on how much nightmare fuel you need, the Android Sisters, or the Chicana Singers, a trio who can sing their own harmonies. When we do some of these videos of television series that take a bit of time to work on, you can often get a song stuck in your head. While working on our Galactica videos, oh boy, did Love, Love, Love burn itself into my brain for a few weeks.
My sympathies.
With the move to a weekly series, and one in a slot designated for younger viewers, the violence of the movie, billions of people being killed or abandoned, would have to be toned down just a bit. Network censors or standards and practices often wanted less than 6 acts of violence per hour in that time slot. So thanks to a reshoot, the Cylons became robots, and then you could just blow up as many of them as you liked.
I just don't think it'll work out.
Why not?
Another of the originally planned movie episodes, The Lost Planet of the Gods, has a lot in it. The Viper pilots are almost all laid low by a virus, and it's up to Starbuck and Apollo to train a group of female shuttle pilots as warriors.
Now, as soon as you're into your uniforms, I want you to move through that hatch to the simulators.
One of them is Serena, who had become engaged to Apollo. Since it's the 70s, the trainees come off like Charlie's Angels before Charlie showed up. But it's not long before Serena, Athena, and the new girls prove themselves in battle. Some of the new pilots would show up in future episodes, which is either a nice bit of continuity movie, or it was just much cheaper to recycle the footage from this episode in later installments. The pilots will die unless Dr. Salak can get some samples from the planet with the Cylon outpost. Meanwhile, there's a void ahead of the fleet, which will make navigation impossible. And now Baltar has been given his own Cylon base star, where he will chase the fleet. Now, it's not a new base star, it's had several previous owners, and Baltar did not get a mechanic to inspect it first. Things do look grim for Galactica, and so Apollo and Serena up and get married, when suddenly a light appears in this void. It's the planet Kobol, the original planet of the humans.
Where life began.
Investigating the ruins on Kobol, Adama finds evidence about the whereabouts of Earth. Baltar shows up, returns Starbuck from captivity, and the Cylons attack. Baltar is in a weird spot as a character. He's been spared by the Cylons, he's been given a mission to extend the hand of peace to the humans, and then he decides to just chase them. He offers Adama a partnership to head back and take over the Cylon Empire. He's so duplicitous, you'd think he was my former accountant. I mean, I used to know him as Mr. Costello, but now he goes by inmate number 7163. Serena is killed in a Cylon ambush, leaving Apollo to raise Boxy as his own son. Jane Seymour was never going to stick around, but it was a pity. However, from here on in, she is one of the very last people to die on this series.
I like the way you haven't gone overboard on furniture.
The Lost Planet of the Gods is stuffed with plot. It also reveals a fair bit about the characters. Starbuck is upset he might lose his best friend. Apollo is miffed at his fiancée training as a Viper pilot. Baltar's new advisor, Lucifer, is almost as devious and untrustworthy as Baltar is. Adama even loses it when he's confronted by Baltar. A small unit was sent to Egypt to film some poorly chosen doubles for Adama, Apollo and Serena, and it does give the production a sense of scale that you couldn't easily replicate on the sound stages using back projection. I don't know about that. I once stood in front of a slide projector displaying holiday snaps from Fiji, and it was like I was there.
Obviously, you can't even stand.
The Viper is flown from the seated position, sir.
And now we get to the 1 hour episodes. Galactica, having been set up as 2 hour stories, now had to be reformatted as a weekly series, and as a result, many of the 1 hour stories may feel much slighter, far less big picture-y. And they also have a habit of being far less removed from, well, let's be charitable and say, the source material than the big movie episodes. It would not take long to work out which books and movies these were based on. The budgets would also be more in keeping with other series of the day, regardless of the content. So we got smaller stories that probably disappointed kids of the day. But as an adult, I do like the fact that you will see a little bit more of the lives of the lead characters. Apollo crash lands on a planet and befriends a young boy, Puppis. In town, the local villain is protected by a gunman, well, a gun robot, Red Eye, a Cylon armed with the pistol of Puppis's papa. Apollo, who has been trying desperately not to use violence, eventually has to use violence. It's the movie Shane, but with all the nouns in the script changed to Galactica versions.
Hold it a second. This is all going by at light speed. How do you know who I am?
I used to not particularly like this. The actor playing the villain sure made some acting choices that have held up about as well as Atlas with bursitis.
Do not mistake my benevolent attitude for stupidity.
The kid is, well, he's okay, he's a kid, but the episode is made by Red Eye, a character I wish we had seen more of. Red Eye had survived a crash, awoke with amnesia, and assumed the first person he saw was their leader, which is a nice touch. And for whatever reason, this episode seems to have been remade as a Tales of the Gold Monkey episode, a series created by the writer of this episode.
Well, what is it? Do you know?
No, but I will find out.
Because it was inspired by a Western, everything also looks and sounds like a Western, so it's shot on a standing Western town set on a backlot with a piano player, a saloon girl, even a town bigwig, and lots of vacuum-formed cowboy hats. If the production team ever made any attempt to hide the story's inspiration, then those instructions clearly got lost in translation.
That makes sense. Get rid of the laser generators and you're unarmed.
In the long patrol, Starbuck goes on a long patrol in a new, super-fast but unarmed Viper. He's bushwhacked and locked up on a long-forgotten penal colony.
What kind of offense is Starbucking? It sounds interesting.
There, the inmates are all oddly Irish-sounding, or at least as oddly Irish as Americans think oddly Irish sound, are serving the sentences of their ancestors.
We supply ambrosia for the colonial warriors.
By going on such a dangerous mission, Starbuck has one last blowout where he inadvertently has to try and date 2 women at once. Fortunately, our time on the ragtag fugitive fleet version of the Pacific Princess doesn't last too long.
Like to see a computer do that.
You asked for it.
It's not necessarily a great episode, but it is oddly enjoyable, mainly because it doesn't feel too obviously based on another movie. But of course, chances are it probably is.
I don't like the way he said that.
I might as well say it here, with very few exceptions, the standalone 1-hour episodes often feel like you're in a holding pattern while waiting for the big two-parters.
Well, since you put it that way.
Gun on Ice Planet Zero. Well, you can almost tell which things they ripped off just by the title, but if you took the Dirty Dozen, Ice Station Zebra, and the Guns of Navarone and added clones, then this is what you would end up with. Gun on Ice Planet Zero, a title that rolls off the tongue like Evel Knievel's nephew Timmy Knievel's attempt to escape being eaten by King Kong, was the last of the initial trio of TV movies that had been planned for Galactica before it was eventually turned into a weekly series. It's also by far the weakest in terms of the writing. But boy, did this one stick with me for decades. The Cylons have a giant cannon on an ice planet, the number of which I can't quite recall.
0?
Oh, thank you. And the fleet has no choice but to pass through a narrow corridor in space. I mean, space is big, but not big enough. Apparently like my pants after Christmas dinner. A colonial warrior is taken prisoner by the Cylons on the planet, but this time it's not Starbuck or Apollo. I mean, I was as shocked as you are, but instead it was one of Starbuck's trainees, which makes our resident lovable rogue feel responsible.
Good Lord.
Rather than risk a frontal assault, Adama elects to send a small commando raid, which consists of 4 familiar convicts with special skills. Richard Lynch, Christine Belford, James Olsen, and Roy Thinnes will go on a mission with Boomer, Apollo, Starbuck. Oh, and of course, did we mention that Boxy and Muffet stowed away on the shuttle? I just wonder if Muffet might run off at some point, the little scamp. It's a little less than the Dirty Dozen, more the filthy foursome, and we'll have to take bets on who's going to try and louse up the mission for their own ends. On the planet, they're rescued by the Thetans, a group of clones of Denny Miller and Britt Eklund, and a bunch of extras who look nothing like either, wearing fake beards or weird masks. The clone's creator, Dr. Ravishel, played by Daniel O'Herlihy, also invented the giant gun, but it does take a little bit of time for Apollo to get him on the same bus.
You did a really great job, Starbuck. It's the kind of landing you always dreamed of. No engine, no instruments, no feel.
It's a bit of a caper, but like the Instagram feed of somebody with bathophobia, it's not particularly deep or meaningful. Some of the pacing in the second episode is a bit weird, but all in all, it's a very enjoyable, just superficial episode.
I want you.
In The Magnificent Warriors, Adama is forced to court a horny middle-aged woman in order to get her generator to use as trade for seeds. While on a farming planet, the locals are having a hard time finding a constable to deal with the raids by the pig-like Borays. Another western town on the backlot. At least this time, most of the locals aren't wearing plastic cowboy hats. Whenever this one shows up for a rewatch, my reaction is, ugh. It is one of the lesser episodes. You can skip it, or you can watch it for Adama's deliciously comedic discomfort.
Please, not in front of the children.
Starbuck is suckered into becoming the town's constable, though the Boray design at least is pretty decent. The title, Magnificent Warriors, is a play on the Magnificent Seven. There may or may not have been 7 people on the mission, but I really couldn't care too much to go back and count. The aggro ships here are recycled from the 1971 movie Silent Running, mixed in with Cylon ships. But the irony is the same footage recycled here would later be recycled in Galactica 1980.
We go up the steps to the castle floor and sneak a peek through the secret door.
In The Young Lords, Starbuck is again separated from the Galactica, where he crash lands on a planet where a Cylon garrison is being frustrated by a group of child soldiers running circles around them. The oldest brother, Kyle, is an intense man-child, where in the days before Twitter, he asserts his manhood by ordering everybody else about. Starbuck helps Kyle with their problem. Their father, played by Bruce Glover, is held hostage by the Cylons, and he organises the kids into a battle against the robotic conquerors, and hopefully rescue the kid's dad.
The easiest way to remember a sequence is to sing it.
In trying to drill the plan into the kids, he teaches them this damn song that does seem oddly specific, and it also plays into Starbuck's burgeoning romance with the oldest of the jailbait kids, who's played by Audrey Landers in a homemade bikini.
Starbuck and Mary creep hand in hand.
There's also a little side story of Lucifer being catty over Spectre, the commander of the local garrison. He's an earlier model brown-nosed droid. There's a history there from when Spectre and Lucifer were both alumni of the Cylons' Unctuous Toady Academy, where they both majored in obsequious groveling.
What you believe is irrelevant.
Remind me someday to tell you about Kyle's feather cap, They say birds of a feather flock together, but that saying ignores what happens when the contents of a pillow meet a hot glue gun.
And may I say, it is a distinct honor to serve the illustrious Baltar. You are a veritable legend.
Well, it's an okay episode. It is tolerable, apart from the song, which is intolerable, like when your sister buys your kid a karaoke machine.
I'm not sure I agree with you entirely.
But next week, man, just keep watching for next week. If you've been keeping score, that's quite a few episodes featuring Starbuck as the main character. You perhaps weren't keeping score, but Richard Hatch as the series star did notice that Apollo was often written as an overly rigid and humorless type, while everybody else fell in love with that much more charismatic character, Starbuck. And that's viewers at home and the writers.
Of all that's holy.
There's nothing holy about me, Adama.
The living legend is one of the finest of the original Battlestar Galactica. Galactica meets up with another Battlestar, the Pegasus, led by the Patton-esque Commander Kane. Kane and Adama instantly butt heads over how to proceed. Adama feels he has to put the safety of the fleet first and foremost, while Kane wants his guts or glory plans to be put into action. I mean, ideally, it's somebody else's guts for Kane's glory.
We'll show those gall-monging Cylons how to fight now. Yes, by the lords of Cobol. The Cylon Empire is about to fall.
Kane and Adama are constantly at loggerheads, despite Adama being the senior officer. Kane actively sabotages any action not of his own devising, much like my backup office nemesis Stanley Falk, who insists on bringing his own cake from home whenever I've organised a collection to buy a cake for a co-worker's birthday. Kane also has a daughter, Sheba, a hotshot Viper pilot who's torn between loyalty to her father and the realisation that his plans are, well, not the most level-headed strategy for long-term survival. And Kane is also Cassiopeia's ex, or at least one of them, but we won't dwell on her former profession on a Sunday evening show in a very early time slot. Starbuck is certain that Cassiopeia will stick with him over Kane. Well, he's 80% certain. Well, 70%. It's a coin toss.
He still has Athena and Miriam and Node and...
Would you stop?
Adama never loses his rag with Kane, and both Lorne, Greene and Lloyd Bridges give great performances. Kane is a character who may or may not have survived, but if the series had continued, I do think it's a fair chance they would have brought him back. Anne Lockhart joins the series, here just as a pilot taking the opposite side to Apollo, but she would become a major character for the rest of the show's run. The two parts of the living legend would be edited together along with scenes from Fire in Space, and released theatrically in 1979 as Mission Galactica: The Cylon Attack. I also remember seeing this one in a theatre, and was thankful at the time that they didn't add Sense-Around. It's also one of the few classic Galactica episodes that would be remade somewhat by Ron Moore's Galactica series in the 2000s.
How can we be accused of violating the orders of a man who isn't following orders himself?
Fire in Space is a pretty tired episode that's basically the Towering Inferno or just some generic 70s disaster movie but set in space. A Cylon attack has seriously damaged the Galactica. A major fire has broken out and is threatening to destroy the Galactica's entire supply of stock footage, which, let me tell you, isn't good news. Adama had been seriously injured and needs an operation, which isn't something you want to do with the power threatened. Boxy, Athena and Boomer are trapped in a storeroom and are about to run out of air. To starve the fire of oxygen, Starbuck and Apollo set charges on the hull of Galactica because somebody had been watching oil fires being put out, and these episodes have some of the most obvious wires this side of Thunderbirds. It's a rare episode that gives Boomer and Athena a bigger role than any other episode, but it is an episode where various scenes are strung together with the same thick wire that they use for the weightless scenes of Apollo and Starbuck. It is one of those episodes that mostly exists just to fill time. Muffet runs off, again. This time attracted by the fleet's favourite dessert, mushies. I have a mushie in my pocket right now. Sorry, I tell a lie. That's just my handkerchief.
Your father, the legendary Commander Kane.
War of the Gods is probably the finest story in all of original Galactica.
Is it possible? We'll know very soon, won't we?
Patrick Macnee guest stars in his third role in the show, Count Ibley, a charismatic being who insists that people like and subscribe.
Your people will be safe under my leadership.
Viper pilots go missing after encounters with fast-moving lights in space, and soon Count Ibley is found on a planet next to the wreckage of a massive spaceship. Ibley has entranced Sheba, where she is either A, under a spell, B, horny, or C, all of the above.
Surprised you asked me to dance, not Count Ibley.
Apollo, are you jealous?
Adama and Iblis have a very civil battle of wills as Iblis offers the fleet things that Adama can't possibly provide. The first of which is he will use his powers to make Baltar surrender. The ships of light occasionally buzz the fleet, which does seem to bug Iblis. He's talked about enemies that are worse than the Cylons. I too have enemies who are far worse than the Cylons, but fortunately, since it's Jan from McCown's birthday today, he's just nipped out to buy himself a chocolate cake from the 7-Eleven. Apollo, of course, isn't having any of this, and he and Starbuck return to the crash site where they had found Iblis to find, well, we are never shown what they see, but it's pretty terrible. Iblis shows up, and we briefly see his real self when he's hit by a laser. He kills Apollo and leaves. Sheba and Starbuck and Apollo's lifeless corpse, who of course finally actually has a story reason why he should get less lines than Starbuck, are all picked up by the Ship of Lights and told, hey dude, it's cool. It's not Apollo's time, we'll send your pilots back. Here are the coordinates for Earth, and as a gesture of friendship, here are some coupons. War of the Gods gave us Triad, the sport of choice on the fleet, where of course Apollo and Starbuck are also the best players of this sport, in a pastime where at least half the audience is there on a boozy bachelorette party.
That heart rate is dancing like a Cylon scanner.
Oh, that's my pulse rate.
It's at this point that the show's reliance on Cylons as the main antagonists would not only diminish, but almost completely vanish. With a few exceptions, Galactica would feature humanoid villains, who were different from Cylons and crucially much cheaper to use. They were able to speak for longer than 2 sentences without giving viewers a headache.
The first is to deliver your enemy. The second is to accurately plot your course to Earth.
The Ship of Light beings, who have kidnapped a group of Viper pilots for reasons not adequately explained, have buzzed the fleet to annoy Iblis, and finally reanimated Apollo after he was killed, are something a little different. They were beings further along in their evolution, though it's not all wine and roses since their Spotify playlist is just one song playing on loop, September by Earth, Wind and Fire.
Starbuck, what do they sing?
You're asking me?
The snazzy white versions of the uniforms for Sheba, Apollo and Starbuck while they're on the Ship of Lights are cool and all, but like a coal miner with a telescope, needs more context to make sense. Some of the scenes set around the crashed spaceship in Part 1 were processed to make the planet look otherworldly, but for some reason the scenes in the Creator would revert to normal, which does somewhat negate the original effect.
My knowledge of the universe is infinite.
The bodies in the crashed ship were never shown, but were filmed, where they were meant to be corpses with cloven feet. Ooh, it's very devilish. War of the Gods, with its charismatic guest star, people like Sheba falling under Iblis' spell, and a war of wills between Iblis and Adama, plus the fact it just feels well written and well made, makes this, well for me at any rate, just the finest episode of original Galactica. The Man with 9 Lives is another standalone episode focusing on Starbuck. Well, I never. The orphan Starbuck may have found his long-lost father, Chameleon, who turns out to be a con man who's being hunted by the scary dudes called the Borrelian No-Men. Is Chameleon Starbuck's father? Is this at all a great episode? Well, I don't like using terms like filler, unless it's to cover up my failed attempts to attach a television to a wall. But this episode is filler, and it isn't filler. It's a nice, budget-friendly Starbuck episode, plus it also fleshes out life in the fleet. So, after you're tired of seeing the same shots of Viper launchers and Cylon raiders, the show is really going to live or die by whether you find these characters remotely interesting. Starbuck was clearly the breakout character, and the writers latched onto that. They clearly loved writing for Dirk Benedict. Meanwhile, ladies and gentlemen, series star Richard Hatch. Guest star Fred Astaire as Chameleon in one of his last screen roles is what makes the episode somewhat watchable. The No-Men are led by, oh look, it's Lance Legault again. Man, that voice. No one plays a son of a bitch character that you should hate, but you don't hate the actor like Lance does. The No-Men are Klingons in all but name, but it's the Klingons of Star Trek The Next Generation, a decade before they were the Klingons of Star Trek The Next Generation. Murder on the Rising Star is, yes, another Starbuck-focused episode. It's mostly Starbuck being accused of murdering his triad rival, Ortega.
I assume it's not guilty.
That's right.
That's not triad as in Hong Kong gangsters, but triad as in men in costumes one wardrobe malfunction away from a late-night time slot. Starbuck says he's innocent, but the circumstantial evidence is comically overwhelming. Apollo is meant to be Starbuck's lawyer, but he instead plays detectives.
We have to find someone called Charybdis.
Charybdis?
The traitor who helped sabotage Capricorn defenses under orders from Baltar before the Cylon attack. See if you can guess who it is. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. It's a bit slight, but it does give Apollo a chance to do something in the second half. Brock Peters is the prosecutor, and Frank Ashmore from V is the dead man Ortega.
I cannot answer that question without further input. I would have to know what Barton...
I wasn't speaking to you.
Sorry.
That's all right.
Greetings from Earth is a movie-length presentation where the first half is pretty good, while the second half does tend to fall apart like cement mixed without enough water. Galactica finds a ship in space with 6 humanoids in suspended animation. The people of the fleet are giddy. The Council are, as usual, throwing caution to the wind and want to do what is clearly the dumbest thing imaginable. That is, awake the sleepers without bothering to quarantine them, or even to revive them without killing them.
Have you the right to order a doctor to carry out a council order when it conflicts with every medical ethic and moral instinct of his conscience?
Dr. Salak is trying to keep them alive, while Dr. Wilker, the fleet's resident sociopath tech bro, wants to understand the technology even if he kills the sleepers, which is a man, a woman, and 4 children. The humans are from a planet called Terra, which may or may not be Earth, just as chicken nuggets may or may not contain chicken.
That doesn't mean that this Terra is the planet Earth we're looking for. And even if it were, what difference does it make?
Apollo is strident in his view that the ship should be allowed to continue on its way. Like, very strident. He's at his most strident, more strident than he's been in any other episode, where of course he's usually quite strident. But this is super duper strident Apollo. The sleeper's awake, and it's Randolph Mantooth from the television series Emergency. Randolph Mantooth is also, incidentally, the best online video game handle since Kermit Defrag and Land Solo. The sleeper ship was fleeing from Luna 7 under the control of the tyrannical Eastern Alliance, and they're heading off to the former colony of Paradine to hide out on a farm. When the ship does get there, they're met by 2 robots, Hector and Vector. Sorry, did I say 2 robots? I meant 2 intensely annoying robots, one of whom was played by Ray Bolger, who had played the Scarecrow in The Wizard of Oz. They're meant to be comic relief, with their bickering and their dancing, and so in the end the only relief they offer the viewer is when they're off screen. Paradine was once a major planet wiped out by the Eastern Alliance. But more importantly, Randolph Mantooth's travelling companion is more interested in Apollo sticking around. And yes, this really just does fall apart once they hit Paradine. I mean, the location work, particularly the scenes filmed at Montreal's Expo 67 site, do look very nice. The ship itself was a redressed version of Buck Rogers' space shuttle, and we're seeing some new effects footage that was shot in a much simpler way than usual, with the ship and backdrop all captured in camera without having to composite multiple images. We've gotten to the point where there are several reasons to move away from Cylon-based stories. The Eastern Alliance are stock space Nazis with nothing remotely interesting about them. They pose about as much threat to the Galactica as a mosquito does to a B-52. Their commandant, though, does look like he shat his pants when he cops a look at Galactica. That is the last of the longer stories, 2-parters or movie-length episodes. And of those, this is by far the very weakest.
Yes.
In Baltar's escape, Baltar tries to escape. Does he escape, or is the title not 100% reflective of the final outcome?
Please.
It's a decent enough episode where Baltar, the Borellian Nomen, and the space Nazis of the Eastern Alliance join forces to escape.
The natural order being whatever the Alliance dictates.
We start with Baltar on mess duty on the prison barge, where he's trying to convince everybody to follow him. It is a lot of fun, but it is also Baltar's last major act of villainy on the show. Adama has a civilian advisor tailing him, Tinya, who's watching him but also turns out to be not quite as stupid as most of the other council members we've seen. This is an okay episode for what it is.
Prepare to die.
Experiment in Terra was an episode originally written for Starbuck, but after Richard Hatch complained about so many Starbuck-focused episodes in a row that somebody got out a red pen and swapped the character names for any lines from Starbuck and Apollo. Too Many Starbucks, of course, is either the unused title of Richard Hatch's Galactica memoir or an example of urban planning gone wrong. The people from the Ship of Lights ask a favour of Apollo, where they want him to travel to Terra to stop a war.
Ridiculous. You say that you're eons ahead of me and you want me to stop a war on a planet I don't know anything about?
He's got a handler, John, who can only be seen or heard by Apollo, and who looks suspiciously like Devon Miles.
You're not contemplating violence, are you?
To everyone on Terra, Apollo looks like the local Jack the Lad, Charlie Watts, who may or may not have been on tour at this time. The plot is a bit of a no-brainer, in that no brain seems to have gone near the script, but I do find this a very enjoyable episode, where we've put Apollo in a role where he has to pretend to be a character that is very much like Starbuck, which he totally and entertainingly fails to do. While the episode is written by Larson, the concept of somebody who appears as other people while trying to influence events while helped by a guide who can only be seen by the main character is of course heavily redolent of supervising producer Don Bellisario's later series Quantum Leap. But in true Glenn Larson style, it's not too far off Here Comes Mr. Jordan and its 1978 remake Heaven Can Wait. So the story and motivations hold up about as well as using spaghetti as a bungee cord, but the episode has enough style to keep me interested. Would it have been even better as a Starbuck episode? Well, everybody else not named Hatch, please step forward. Edward Mulhare would of course show up on Larson's series Knight Rider a few years later.
What an excellent idea.
While Melody Anderson, Dale Arden from Flash Gordon, would also be cast as a regular in a Larson series, the short-lived Manimal.
Thank you. I remember the rest of this story.
John Delancey from Star Trek The Next Generation also has a small role. In Take the Celestra, Adama's old boss is given an award after he had come out of retirement to lead the industry vessel Celestra, where he's such a grumpy hard-ass that he wears boxer shorts made from sandpaper. Commander Cronus is what you get when you gave Oscar the Grouch command, and in this story he gets not one but two separate groups of his underlings trying to mutiny. The first group is captured pretty easily, but there's a complication when one of them, Aurora, is one of Starbuck's exes. Then the second mutiny is a little nasty when Cronus' second in command, Mo Howard, attempts to maroon the shuttle with everybody in deep space. Take the Celestra is alright, but otherwise it doesn't really do all that much, apart from maybe show Cassiopeia giving Starbuck enough rope. The final episode, The Hand of God, was made when most of the series' budget had already been used up. Yet here they still managed to create an endearing story with a lot of heart and a lot of action.
It's very weak, but we are receiving a signal.
But first they have to deal with a random Cylon base ship, and everybody throws caution to the wind as if there was no tomorrow. Because this was the last episode, there was no tomorrow. Apollo and Starbuck use a captured Cylon fighter to infiltrate the base star and knock out its electronics, allowing Galactica to get in the first strike. There is a massive battle between Vipers and Cylon ships, where almost every frame uses pre-existing footage pieced together rather nicely. Even the episode's ending, where Apollo and Starbuck need to prove to the fleet that they're not Cylons by waggling their wings, was done in a way that did not require new effects footage. Apollo and Sheba's former love-hate relationship becomes official, with scenes of Cassiopeia and Sheba both castigating Apollo and Starbuck for volunteering for what they all think is a suicide mission. As far as the production team were concerned, this wasn't an episode for kicking anything down the road. So, smoke 'em if you got 'em.
Better odds than we had on Caprica. We lost at Caprica.
The end of the episode has Apollo and Starbuck back in the obsolete observatory from the start of the episode, nicknamed the Hand of God, where they wander off just as Galactica picks up a signal.
The Eagle has landed.
What a twist! Don Bellisario wrote the episode, and there was a disagreement between him and Larson over using a clip of the moon landing, as Larson wanted to keep his options open as to when Galactica was set, and whether or not the show was in our past or our future.
I'm tired of running, Adama. So am I.
The show was cancelled, but then ABC quickly decided they had made a huge mistake and asked Glenn A. Larson to make a cheaper, more kid-focused Galactica for an early evening time slot. Oh, and they had to find Earth. Larson by this stage didn't want to do it, but he did what anybody in a similar position would do. He charged ABC a bullshit restocking fee.
Do we have an agreement?
Galactica 1980 was quickly put into production for broadcast in early 1980. The first 3 episodes told one story, where Galactica finally discovers Earth.
We have at last found Earth.
An older Commander Adama, who by now seems to moonlight as a department store Santa Claus, takes advice from the mysterious Dr. Z, who's rather cold and calculating, like a liquid-cooled PC, but he only gets low frame rates in his favourite game, which coincidentally is DayZ. A vision of Cylon ships attacking the Earth seems rather cool and all, even when you realised half of it is repurposed from the 1974 film Earthquake. Of course, it's just a simulation to show what could happen if the show was going to be any good.
What have I done?
Galactica sends teams of scouts to make contact with influential people who can help with eventually making themselves known to Earth's authorities. One team is made up of Adama's grandson, Captain Troy, the former Boxy, and his buddy, Dylan. Their mission is to make contact with Earth's most famous scientist, Mike Brady. But once on the ground, Troy and Dylan are about as clueless as a pair of huskies attempting to quietly infiltrate the secret lair of Ernst Stavro Blofeld. They meet aspiring television reporter Jamie Hamilton, though she's not 100% sure these guys are on the level. But she sticks with them anyway in order to secure her new television gig. It turns out they're not terrorists trying to kidnap a famous scientist, but aliens making first contact. That does sound exactly like what happened to my 10th grade chemistry teacher. Well, at least as far as he told it, just before he took extended sick leave. Back on the Galactica, one officer, Xavier, doesn't agree with Adama's plans and instead travels to the past to try and influence mankind's scientific development so they can help the Galacticans in the future. Troy and Dylan are to bring him back, and Jamie is on board as a guide, somebody who knows Earth's history better than the two fellas whose idea of Earth fashions was derived from a Patagonia mail-out. There's a bit of time travel to World War II, which adds a bit of production value in amongst all of the stock footage. Xavier's plan is thwarted, but of course he escapes. Dr. Z in the first few episodes is played by Robbie Rist, and serial guest villain Richard Lynch would play Xavier, though both characters would be played by other actors in later episodes. Whatever sets and props they could salvage from Battlestar Galactica are here, including the full-size Viper and its 2D cutout siblings. The Colonial Warrior costumes were reused, as were most of the props, though a lot of the unique world building from the original series has gone. So no Lords of Kobol, and few mentions of the various made-up terms that Larson had sprinkled throughout the original series run, such as the units of measurements.
You're supposed to set up the stun. Felger curve, I thought I did.
But the made-up swear words stayed in, because kids swearing is never not funny.
It's called an apple, you frimp.
Unless, of course, it's at a job interview or a funeral. The 3-episode story arc ends with that old standard, the "we make a good team" speech at the end of their first adventure together.
And we do make a pretty good team.
The time travel aspect was originally a much bigger part of the show's pitch, but after these first 3 episodes were seen by the network, they did not want time travel in any more episodes. So once that happened, Jamie's role would diminish to almost nothing in some episodes. So as we mentioned in our earlier videos, even when the original series was in production, its makers knew that they would have to make major changes for any second season to get costs down, which would include finding Earth and a major reduction in the number of continuing characters. So while it's very easy to wish that it just continued along with the original series as it was with absolutely no changes, that was never ever on the cards.
Most people don't believe what they see, and they have very short memories. 30 years later, they've all but forgotten.
In the 2-part story, The Super Scouts, the Cylons attack the fleet, or at least whatever stock footage of Cylons they had lying about does. In order to save the children of the fleet, Dr. Z advises Adama to send them to Earth where they can learn about Earth and become acclimatized. The cynic in me says that the people in the fleet just wanted to send 12 uncontrollable kids to Earth Camp for a while so they could have some peace and quiet and get on with some quality heavy drinking. More hijinks ensue as Dylan tries to sell some gold in a bank, but then accidentally robs the bank, while Troy buys up big at a sporting goods store to outfit the kids as scouts. Because the kids were raised in a different level of gravity, on Earth they can do things like jump huge distances into the air, they can leap into trees and such. These are all incredibly useful skills in case of bear attacks, assuming of course that the bear isn't also from space. But also, as we will see, there are lots of scenes with child actors throughout Galactica 80, most of whom were children of the crew. These scenes have aged about as gracefully as a rusty Cadillac parked next to a salt factory. The Air Force and this week's random character in a colonel's uniform are investigating the kids' case, but some of the scouts have become sick after drinking water polluted by a local chemical plant. So we have a medical drama where we're trying to save the dying kids, plus we have to deal with the locals who are worried about their jobs and convince the plant manager to better deal with the plant's toxic waste. It's such an un-Galactica sort of thing until a new anti-grav vessel from Galactica brings Adama and Dr. Z for a visit to Earth. Also, if you need a sitter, call Jamie on 555-9878, references supplied. We have clawing kids, dying kids, angry townsfolk, and bumbling Air Force personnel. We're just doing very well, aren't we?
To tell you how proud Troy and I are of the way you've conducted.
Spaceball continues with the Scouts having to substitute for a kids' baseball team.
Captain Troy, Lieutenant Dylan.
Lieutenant Nash.
Xavier has returned, but he's now played by a different actor since Xavier is somehow able to take the form of another colonial warrior.
Lieutenant Nash is standing right here beside me.
Meanwhile, Xavier has tricked Troy and Dylan into taking his sabotage Viper into space, and the pair become marooned without fuel and are running out of oxygen. This part of the episode is quite solid, giving Kent McCord and Barry Van Dyke a chance to do some actual acting. But then we keep switching back to the damn Scouts. Jamie and the Scouts have to win the game without showing off their heightened abilities too much. Xavier shows up claiming to be a friendly Galactican, though it takes a while for Jamie to work out that Xavier is not on her side.
How good to hear your voice once again.
Jeremy Brett plays this version of Xavier with a permanent sneer and an oddly affected version of his usual stage voice, which ordinarily sounds like honey dripping with razor blades.
Then don't worry. I will give the children extra special care.
Jeremy Brett would later go on to star in the long-running British Sherlock Holmes series throughout the 80s and into the 90s. Here, he looks about as comfortable as a ripe tomato in a sack of potatoes. And man, it just has to be said again, these scouts are highly annoying. Fortunately, there's only one more episode with them in any major role. But if you wanted to point to one thing that marks out Galactica 1980 as just being bad, or at least a very bad follow-up to Battlestar Galactica, it's the scouts.
Why didn't you say so?
Such was the care and attention lavished on the series, nobody bothered to proofread the director's credit. The night the Cylons landed is one of the better installments, since, mercifully, the scouts are barely in it. A Cylon raider crashes on Earth with a humanoid Cylon commander and one Cylon Centurion. It's Halloween and they don't look all that out of place. The Cylons need to find a transmitter to report Earth's location back to the Cylon Empire, and of course Troy and Dylan must stop them. But first they need to get to New York on a passenger plane, where they will thwart a hijacking. And then in New York, they'll steal a police car, drive it off a pier, end up stealing some costumes from some dancers. Meanwhile, the Cylons have hitched a lift with a couple on their way to a Halloween party where everybody just happens to work for a radio station. Legendary DJ Wolfman Jack plays a version of himself. William Daniels would go on to play the voice of Kit in Knight Rider, and of course for others, he was in St. Elsewhere and Boy Meets World.
So, this is New York.
Space Croppers has the Cylons attacking and destroying the fleet's aggro ship, as in the vessels they used to grow food, not the ones they used to start fights down the pub. An exciting battle sequence, which yes is mainly stock footage from the original show, but it's still got stuff. And then the rest of the episode is a plot basically out of any 70s or 80s action-adventure series where somebody helps out some local farmers who are having a problem with the local bigwig backed by hired goons trying to force them to sell their land. Troy and Dylan have bought a share in a farm and have brought with them Galacticans to work the fields, since the fleet no longer has the capacity to grow enough food. Meanwhile, Adama and Dr. Z show up in their giant saucer. Either that or they've borrowed the set from a talent show. The battle scenes at the start might give you a false sense of excitement, while the farming scenes were only enlivened by Dana Elkar's character ranting and raving about illegal aliens. Was there a show around this period that Dana Elkar did not appear in? If there is, I probably don't want to see it.
No, they're hurting them. What about those two? Why don't you ask them, the rest of them?
For some reason, Troy and Dylan use leftover Buck Rogers handgun props in one scene, and then we're treated to more scenes of scouts and now Galactican farm workers flying into the air to scatter seed, and more god-awful singing.
Some kind of attempt at crude artistic expression.
They didn't have most of the sets, they didn't have great scripts, but they had the bikes. While it was not the intention, this 9th episode would be the last to feature Troy, Dylan, Jamie, and thank God, the Scouts. An 11th episode was being filmed when the order came to cancel the series. This would have seen another appearance of Xavier in a time travel story involving Troy, Dylan, and Jamie, though the episode was never completed. It's generally known as Galactica 1980, though some episodes are branded Battlestar Galactica, and at some point you may have seen it listed as Season 2 of Galactica. It is not.
But sir, we can't just leave him out there. Boomer, don't you think I want to go back for him? You think I want to leave someone I love like a son?
But the 10th and final episode of Galactica 1980 was as close as we were ever going to get to an original Battlestar Galactica style episode. It borrows from Robinson Crusoe in places with a little bit of The Odd Couple, and unlike everything else this season, it's just proper Battlestar Galactica.
That was an unexpected move.
Dr. Z, for once, is less an aloof mental giant and more a teenager with a breaking voice. He's had a vivid dream, and Adama insists the youngster describe that vivid dream in detail.
Tell me your dream.
Now, generally, I would be very wary of an old man asking a teenage boy to describe a vivid dream that they'd had, but this was an early evening show. Years ago, a great warrior called Starbuck was lost on a mission where he crashed on a deserted planet. The Cylons, who damaged his craft, didn't quite make it down in one piece. Starbuck knows the fleet will have to leave him behind in order to lose the Cylons, and so he's going to try and get by. He repairs one of the Centurions, who he names Cy, partly so he has somebody to talk to, but mostly because he wants somebody to play cards with.
Well, this is a grand day. Only been in charge of this planet for 3 days, and already I've doubled the population.
Starbuck and Cy will become bickering buddies, which only becomes worse when Cy finds a mysterious pregnant woman who's later named Angela. When she does eventually speak, she talks about Starbuck making a sacrifice and also perhaps maybe they should get off this planet before the Cylons find them. Starbuck cannibalizes what he can from the wreckage of the two ships, but he'll end up sending Angela and the child into space alone, so they'll have enough fuel to reach the fleet. A shootout between Cy and the Cylons leaves Starbuck to face his future alone.
Oh yes, uniform of the day will be, polished metallic.
I absolutely love this episode. It's the most affecting of the entire series and a bittersweet return to form. It's genuinely a very good episode and has some of the saddest moments of the entire series, played for poignancy rather than melodrama.
Not Cylon. Friends.
When Cy finally dies, well, I haven't been this sad at a machine dying than the first time my Xbox 360 developed Red Ring of Death, just before Halo 3 came out. No, I tell a lie. The order is the first Red Ring of Death, Cy's death, second Red Ring of Death, third Red Ring of Death, K9's death in school reunion, Yellow Light of Death, fourth Red Ring of Death, and the time I discovered my PC's power supply had become a maternity ward for mice.
I cannot understand what he hopes to accomplish.
Had the series continued, we may have revisited our favourite Viper jock.
I might have some questions.
Ask me anything you like.
It's also implied that Angela may have been one of the beings from the Ship of Light, giving Starbuck a chance to prove himself good. While this wasn't meant to be the final episode of anything, this was the last completed episode, and just proved to be a good send-off for Starbuck, if not an entirely happy one. It did show that Galactica still had it.
Goodbye, Starbuck.
Even if the budget wasn't there to do this sort of thing every week. They even managed to make this episode without breaking the budget.
Oh, Felgacarb.
Dirk Benedict also showed that he had more charisma as Starbuck in one episode than Troy and Dylan in the other 9 episodes combined. So that was Battlestar Galactica from 1978 and Galactica 1980. The original series is still very enjoyable to watch. And Galactica 80, with a couple of exceptions, is sort of just there if you really do need more of that world.
Don't ever do that again.
Now, I'm somebody who's enjoyed all variations of Galactica, I mean all of them. But man, Galactica 1980 really needed more episodes like Return of Starbuck. With that, we do conclude our final look at the original incarnations of Battlestar Galactica. A great premise that delivered in its earliest episodes.
Yes, so it appeared, didn't it?
Showed that it could flip between smaller episodes and big epic 2-part episodes. The sequel had a few good bits, but a lot of terrible bits aimed at a younger audience.
Somehow that makes sense to me.
Good. Are you with me?
If you enjoyed this review, please like and subscribe, leave a comment below, or check out some of our other videos.
I want to remember you just as you are, beautiful against the stars.